On a cold November evening in 1975, a group of loggers will be finishing up a day's worth of hard work deep inside the forest near Snowflake, Arizona. As the truckers packed up for the day, they made their journey back down through the dark forest road, where the truckers were spot a mysterious glowing object hovering above the trees. One of them stepping out to investigate what this light is. A moment later, he's gone. With 6 men going into the forest, only coming back as 5, the disappearance of Travis Walton would go on to ignite a search, divide a small town, and become one of the most infamous UFO cases in American history. If you enjoy hearing real stories about unexplained events and dark encounters, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps the channel to grow and allows me to continue bringing stories like this. Now, let's get back. The story of Travis Walton begins in a small town called Snowflake, Arizona, and at its core was a tight-knit Mormon group. And while Travis and his family wasn't very religious themselves, they still chose to settle down here, and in fact would go on to thrive. For most of Travis's life, he would be very into fitness, wanting to maintain his health and keep his body in the best shape possible, which tended to lead him into some crazy paths, such as wanting to be a bull rider. And while his bull riding career was, all intents and purposes, very short-lived, he would find another way to stay fit, through karate. And by all accounts, he was very good at it, even going on to become a black belt. Eventually, though, kids grow up, and so did Travis, putting away his black belt and developing this bit of a bad boy persona around the town. Known for his Harley Davidson and his bad attitude, for the most part, the townspeople tried to stay out of Travis's way, not wanting to experience any problems with Travis or feel what 10 years of karate felt like. But problems did want Travis, and eventually his bad boy karma would catch up to him. In late May of 1971, Travis will be arrested for the first time at the age of 18. Travis and one of his friends would go on to plead guilty in front of the judge after they were caught breaking and entering to one of the town's local molding companies, stealing their checks and forging them so that they could cash out on them. After his arrest, Travis would be placed on 2-year house arrest as they awaited trial by the judge, and during that time, his bad boy career just fizzled out. Travis's brief run-in with the law did change him though. After going through all these court issues and seeing where his path was taking him, he decided it was time to change his ways. And during that time, with the inescapable pleading from his mother to change his ways, he had a lot of time to do some soul searching. Stop hanging out with that previous group of friends to avoid any more trouble, and work on himself. And with no other issues other than, the fraud. When he finally went to trial, the judge allowed Travis to plead not guilty and cleanse his record of the whole incident. I wish I was friends with that judge. Fraud? What? And now, with no more issues with the law, Travis needed to find some work, eventually landing a job with ex-best friend and future brother-in-law Mike Rogers, who created his own small logging business at the time, promising his future wife to keep her brother out of trouble. Mike was ready for work, and with Travis by his side, all that was left was to put together the rest of the crew. And so let's hear about the boys. His ragtag group consisted of 3 SARs, being Alan Dallas, John Gollett, and Travis himself, and the remaining men being Dwayne Smith, Kenneth Peterson, and Steve Pierce, who were on piling duties, which basically meant taking the cut down trees and neatly stacking them in the distance somewhere so that they wouldn't be in the way. This small group of hardworking men did butt heads from time to time, as men do, but at the end of the day, they were always able to knock out jobs quickly and efficiently. That all would change that November. After an exhausting day mentally and physically, the sun had set a good 15 minutes prior. The faint sound of saws still going in the forest as the crew was still cutting in the faint remaining sunlight. Mike, who was preoccupied with redoing a stack poorly done by a member of the team, completely realized that he let time slip by him and made Travis give the end duty signal that day. He began to load everything back up into the back of Mike's 65 International, being very careful to secure the gas cans so that they wouldn't spill everywhere in the back of the truck on the bumpy ride home. After securing all the equipment, Mike slammed the tailgate shut, and the crew began to load back up into the truck to make the journey back home. The rest of the crew piling in the back of the truck so that they could light their cigarettes, to also not blow smoke in Mike and Dwayne's face, as they weren't smokers. Mike revved the truck engine, and the crew began to make their hour-long journey back home. While the men in the truck began to settle down, a couple of them chose to take a nap to kill the time on the drive back. The only sound was the clinking of the tools in the truck as they made their way through the forest road. and Travis taking in the cool autumn breeze from the window, as the discomfort from the day's work wouldn't allow him to sleep. While Mike's driving, a light would go on to catch his attention from the tree line. Originally, Mike just assumed it was the sun, as it was usually setting around this time on the journey back home. But the crew wasn't heading home on time that day, as Mike gave the signal late, which alerted Mike, as the sun had set a half hour ago. By this point in time, the light from the tree line had become so bright that a couple of the other men in the truck also began to notice it, some of them chalking it up to maybe it was hunters coming out to hunt for the night, others even implying that maybe it was a forest fire from some improperly stacked wood. But all the theories would stop in the car when Alan would randomly yell out, "Son of a bitch!" At this point in time, the men in the car would begin to panic, as going from being half asleep to trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Mike sticking out one of his hands to try to see past this bright light that was basically blinding him by this point. Travis sticking his head out the window to try to offer Mike some vision to see what was on the road ahead of him will suddenly yell out for Mike. Mike, listening to Travis, thinking they were about to hit something, hit the brakes, causing all the men in the truck to jolt forward. Dwayne, still looking at this object, stated that it looked like a plane. And Alan said the only thing he could at this moment: "Oh my god, it's a flying saucer." At this time, all the men claiming to see this flying saucer right in front of them would go on to be described by the crew as being over 15 feet in length and 8 feet high, emitting a strange golden glow, which would explain why they thought it was the sun. They would also go on to state that it looked like a giant glowing ball of metal, only being broken up by the silver rings that it had around it. Travis, at this point, seeing what could only be described as fiction in front of him, couldn't hold himself back. He wanted to figure out what it was that they were seeing, so he decided to jump out the car. All the men in the truck was freaking out, trying to understand what Travis was doing, would go on to yell for him to come back here. While Travis is still darting towards his craft and the crew is yelling for him to come back, they all will begin to hear this sound, to which they could only describe as being the sound of a generator humming in their ears. And all of a sudden, this craft would shoot off a strange blue beam towards Travis, hitting him and making a zapping sound upon impact. Travis, being hit by this beam with such force, caused him to jolt his head back, making him go unconscious. And to the crew's dismay, they also begin to see Travis being levitated 3 feet above the ground. At this point, Mike had been completely overcome with fear, seeing what just happened to Travis in front of him and thinking about the safety with the rest of the crew members still in his truck, just took off driving as fast as he can in the opposite direction from this craft. Mike, looking into the side rear view mirror to see if the craft was following them, would recall seeing the craft rise up from the middle of the road and streak off towards the northern hemisphere. After some begging from the men of the crew, telling Mike that they couldn't just leave Travis back there, they decided to go back. And when Mike and the crew arrived back to the scene where they saw this UFO, there wasn't any signs of it, or Travis. They had disappeared, almost as if they weren't there. As soon as getting back into the city, we'll go on to reach out to the local Navajo Sheriff Police Department around 7:30 p.m. And we're still frantic, and the deputies, after hearing this bizarre story of a UFO abducting a member of their crew, didn't even know where to begin to start. So they reached out to their commander, Sheriff Gillespie. Sheriff Gillespie was a no-nonsense man, and after hearing this bizarre story from his deputies, decided to take Mike and 2 of the members from the logging crew back up to the road where they claimed the supposed reduction had happened. And after this 3rd search, they still weren't able to find Travis or any signs of this UFO. Gillespie, still being skeptical of this whole UFO story, decided to call off the search as it was way past 12 p.m. and being out in a dark forest wasn't really helping them search for anything. Sheriff Gillespie sent a deputy to accompany Mike to go inform Travis's mother what had happened to her son. While during the visit, while Mike is explaining to Travis's mother what had happened on that road that night, she would go on to make a strange sing that would catch the deputy off guard. That's just the way these types of things happen. That comment caught the deputy off guard, as by all accounts they're explaining a situation that was straight out of fiction, and she just seemed to be okay with it. Mike would go on to explain to the deputy that one thing Miss Walton was very into was sci-fi movies. In fact, regularly watching alien movies with the family. On November 7th, the search for Travis Walton officially began, with a group of over 40 to 50 people from the community coming out to help search for Travis. This group made the hour-long trek back to the work site where they began the search for him. Besides the cold weather and the dense forest, the group still managed to cover over 2.5 miles of the area. Before the group could search more of the area, Travis's mother would reach back out to the sheriff's department, asking them to call off the search, calling the search futile and that the aliens will bring Travis back soon. Now, at this point in time, the case for Travis will begin to take a drastic turn. It was one thing that the sci-fi story already led to a missing persons case, but the Walton family was not only taking the news of Travis' disappearance very well, they were also interfering with the case at this point. They were insisting on calling off the search, not participating in any of them, and constantly spreading this alien story around the town. Sheriff Gillespie didn't think that we were dealing with flying saucers and little gray men, but instead, a well put together murder cover-up. Now, even with a number of things not sitting well with the police department, they still didn't have any evidence or any leads to go off of what could have happened to Travis. So where better to start than to look into the logging crew? Did you cause Travis Walton any serious harm? Was Travis Walton harmed by a member of the crew? Is Travis Walton's body buried somewhere in the Turkey Springs area? Did you tell the truth about the UFO abduction? All the men answering no to questions 1, 2, and 3, and yes to the 4th. The polygrapher who was administering this test did confirm that most of the crew was telling the truth, except for one, and that person was Alan Dallas. Now, each group has its issues, but in this group, their issue just so happened to be named Alan. Now, Alan being the group's resident hothead, it wasn't uncommon for them to get into verbal arguments with Alan from time to time. At this point into the group's tenure, there really wasn't anybody who hasn't gotten into an argument with Alan, and usually everybody just disregarded it as he would be in a better mood around an hour later. But this one was different, and while all the details are still a little bit blurry, it had come to light that Alan wasn't being a team player, and instead trying to shoot a shot with Travis's then girlfriend at the time. And Travis rightfully called him out on it, which led to that argument that Mike pulled up to that morning. Luckily though, Mike was able to talk some sense into the men, and other than an awkward car ride to the work site, everyone seemed okay for the most part. Travis at this point completely didn't care about the fight, just chalking it up to the jerk that Alan was, and it was something that they would have to just move on from. Unfortunately for Travis, Alan did still hold a grudge, as Travis, while working, out of his peripheral would see the shadow of a tree falling towards him. And Travis, quickly jumping out of the way to not get crushed by this tree, was looking around to see who was cutting like a madman, only to turn around and be greeted by Alan, who was the one responsible for the tree that fell in his direction, going on to lock eyes with Travis and smile, which to Travis interpreted as this wasn't over. And you would think, if Alan had so many fights with the team, why would they keep him on the crew? And yeah, Alan was a hothead, but he also was the crew's fastest cutter. And while some contributed his speed to his anger, Mike also couldn't afford to let him go, as he was his fastest worker, and they had deadlines to meet that couldn't be adjusted. Listen, Mike, I don't care how good of a worker he is, you can't have a workforce if half your workforce is dead. Trying to prevent any more future incidents from happening with Alan that day, Travis made it his goal to put some distance between the two. Travis took Dwayne with him to gather the trees that he cut so he wouldn't have to interact with Alan in any way. Dwayne was still a bit inexperienced on the team and would often walk into the cutting path of Travis, but still, Travis decided to work with him as it beat the alternative. While this incident did paint Alan in a really bad light, and he did attempt to cause Travis some physical harm, there still wasn't enough evidence for an arrest, as all the proof was just people's memories of what happened at the time, and still no body. But it did lead to more questions for our star of the show, Mike Rogers himself. Him not being able to let go members that was actively endangering his crew made you wonder what was going on with his business. And the results were certainly interesting. Rogers, being in his late 20s at the time, was a very determined man, starting his career just as a regular logger himself. And with that, he began to quickly start understanding the ins and outs of the business, developing a keen eye to a point where he could constantly gouge the price of land per acre without any prior research. And eventually, with all the knowledge he procured working for someone else, he decided to go off and start his own business, which would work out in his favor, as he would underbid just enough to make his competitors' prices look reasonable, but leave a little bit of room there for him to make a profit off of these jobs. Soon, Mike's business will have its big break, being offered the forest contract for Turkey Springs. And all Mike and his crew had to do was clear out 12 acres, with the job's deadline to be completed in August of 1975. And just as it seemed as everything was going up for Mike, unfortunately his good luck would end, as 3 men that was originally on his crew quit after having issues with the workload and other business issues, specifically named Alan, that caused them to want to resign. All of them quit on Mike the same day. Mike, realizing that he's now down 3 men, realized he didn't have the power he once had to complete this job, and so he asked for an extension from the government. And luckily, the extension was granted, giving him till November 10th to complete the job. On October 16th, a forestry service worker on behalf of the government would go out to see the progress that Mike's team has made, and concluded that, even with the new deadline, they still wouldn't be able to complete the contract in time. Now, this is a big deal because failing to complete a deadline given by the government would mean that not only could Mike be fined $2,500, which will be equivalent to $15,000 in our time, but also be disqualified from taking on any other projects from the government. Now, you're probably wondering, how does this contract even matter towards a missing man? While in this contract, an aforementioned way to avoid these fines would be an act of God clause. And for those of you who don't know what that means, because I surely didn't at first, it exempts a party from liability for their obligations due to unforeseeable and uncontrollable natural events. Now, I personally don't think alien abductions is a natural occurring event, but it makes a good argument for the times, I guess. And from a police approach, it makes a pretty good angle for why Travis disappeared. Your brother-in-law's missing, and you're about to lose this big government contract. Maybe you off the guy to save face. And now with 2 motives being established, the only thing left is to find Travis's remains. As the pressure would begin to come down on the crew from all sides, this story would take the nation like a wildfire, with reporters from all over America coming to this small town to figure out what happened to Travis. And with Sheriff Gillespie trying to find a more down-to-earth angle within all this mess, generally believed a murder cover-up was being evolved. And just as the walls begin to close in, everything will be completely shaken up again, with just one phone call. Travis' sister and her husband, rushing out in the middle of the night, made a pit stop to grab her younger brother Dwayne before heading into the city of Herbert. As they pulled up on the side of the road, they would go on to see somebody unconscious laying inside of a phone booth. And once they were able to get a little bit closer, they quickly realized this was Travis. And his brother-in-law got out and lifted Travis into the car before heading off towards their mother's house. Now, unbeknownst to the Walton family, the operator on the other end of that call remembered hearing Travis's name from the local news stories, and realizing that, hey, this may be Travis, alerted the police. And with that, the police at this point still had no idea that the Walton family may have had contact with Travis, decided to send a deputy under the guise of a wellness check. When the deputy showing up, there was already some pretty odd things going on. He recalled seeing Dwayne transferring gas from one car to another, and when the deputy asked him about it, Dwayne simply said he forgot to fill up that morning. And while the family was talking with the officer, the deputy did find it very weird that none of them mentioned that Travis had returned. And since this was just under the guise of a wellness check, he just left. At this point, the Walton family claimed that Travis looked pretty bad, apparently coming in and out from consciousness and experiencing memory loss. Dwayne decided that they needed to get help, but instead of, taking him to a hospital, he decided to reach out to a UFO researcher, who decided to recommend Dwayne a doctor to take Travis to. And before you go, this isn't the doctor that you think it is. It's actually a hypnotist. For those of you confused at this point, because believe me, I was while researching this, apparently this hypnotist was a licensed specialist. But the problem is, he was a therapist, not a medical doctor. And it's pretty safe to assume that this specialist was confused himself as well, because midway through the session with Travis, he would end it and tell Dwayne that he needs to take Travis to go see an actual medical doctor. Seeing how Travis was coming in and out of consciousness during their session, the therapist did notice that Travis had a needle mark inside of his inner elbow, which, seeing Travis in this state, but also seeing the mark on his arm, advised Dwayne that Travis may be on drugs, as he sees this all the time in some of his fellow patients. At this point, you would finally think that they took Travis to the hospital, right? No. Instead, Dwayne reached back out to his UFO group, who was able to get two actual medical doctors to come out and do a home visit for Travis. Now, Dwayne did state that they weren't allowed to ask Travis about what happened or about the abduction, but nonetheless, they still decided to help. Now, all throughout the day, after Dwayne reached out to his UFO group, people started putting the pieces together that Travis had returned. Journalists and UFO groups began blowing up the Walton family phone and showing up to the property unannounced trying to get interviews with Travis. And word eventually got over to Sheriff Gillespie, whose whole story is starting to fall apart before him, as Travis is alive, but yet no one has reached out to the police yet. Until finally, after being hounded by these journalists constantly and Travis's condition deteriorating worse, they finally decided to reach out. They called Sheriff Gillespie and informed that they did have Travis and that they were in the city of Glendale, 4 hours away from Snowflake. Sheriff Gillespie, being tired of not being able to speak to Travis himself and being hounded by these journalists, decided to make the personal drive to Glendale himself and finally put an end to the story today. Finally, Travis would have his time to speak and share his side of the story himself. Finally getting his chance to sit down with Sheriff Gillespie, he began to tell his story to the best of his knowledge. Travis describing his experience being awoke after getting hit by this beam. He was laying on this table, finding some sort of aperture on his lower chest, where apparently 3 hairless beings were standing over him. They were apparently 5 feet tall and with eyes the size of quarters, having small mouths and ears, and apparently they were wearing orange loose-fitting overalls. Walton could only describe them as looking like human fetuses. After realizing where he was, he began to have a hard time breathing as fear completely began to engulf him. He jumped up off the metal table and knocked the device that was around his chest off of him, and decided he needed to protect his back from these creatures, so he walked along a corner so that he can constantly have vision of them. Realizing there was a shelf behind him, he grabbed what appeared to be a foot-long cylinder off of it to protect himself. He took the cylinder and hit it up against the side of the shelf, hoping it would break to give him a sharp object, but nothing happened. The beings, taking in Travis's aggression, decided to not engage further and decided to leave the room apparently. As the beings was leaving the door and entering the hallway, Travis took off running, sprinting past them and running down a corridor opposite of their direction. In the middle of running, trying to find somewhere to hide as he feared the beings were following behind him, he saw a room. Inside this room, Travis was trying to find anything he could to barricade the door. A couple moments later, a being resembling a human would walk into the room. This being was wearing a blue astronaut suit and a helmet and was quietly ushering Travis to follow him. While at first Travis was confused on where this being could have possibly come from, he just assumed that, hey, maybe this person was abducted too and found a way to escape just like him. And while they're making their way down this corridor, Travis did attempt to ask this person questions like, how'd you get here? Where are you from? But the being never gave him a reply whatsoever. This man would then proceed to bring Travis through this hangar, where Travis would describe exiting this disc-shaped ship that was similar to the one he saw on the road, but much bigger, along with 7 other different crafts, all stationed inside this hangar. His guide proceeded to load him up into one of these ships where he saw 3 other humans. This time, one of them was a girl wearing the same exact suit as the guy did, but just didn't have a helmet. Before he had time to ask any of these other beings questions, he described seeing the lady get up and throw a giant oxygen mask over his face, to which he lost consciousness instantly. All of a sudden, he just remembered waking up in pain, laying in the middle of the road, and when he opened his eyes and looked up, he saw the ship that dropped him off hovering above him. Struggling to get up to his feet, he knew he needed help badly, so he struggled over to the nearest phone booth he could find. And with that, he attempted to call the only number that he could remember off the top of his head, his sister, before he abruptly lost consciousness. While Travis did take some time to recover after being missing for over 7 days, he did eventually get back to his healthier self again. He described this experience as having fundamentally changed his view on the universe itself. After Travis's return, 2 camps began to form. In my own personal opinion, some changes. Shockingly, Sheriff Gillespie and Travis would go on to become great friends. After getting the chance to sit down with Travis and let him recount his story to him, they would go on to try to find some answers, even going to go create a YouTube channel in hopes to retell their story and try to figure out what happened to them that night. On the other hand, Mike Rogers, 35 years later in 2010, would go on to recount his statement from what happened that day. Mike posting on his Facebook page and announcing, "I, Michael H. Rogers, being of sound rational mind, do hereby give notice that I am no longer to be considered a witness to Travis C. Walton's supposed abduction." A couple months later, him and Travis would reconnect and Mike would recount his statement, but by then the damage was already done because on one hand you're saying it happened, on another it didn't happen. You're giving conflicting information, and the damage to Travis' story was already done. Whether you believe it or not, Travis's story would go on to become one of the many documented UFO encounters in American history. And while we may never know the true answers on what happened that November evening, it definitely leaves you wondering on what possibly could be out there. Thank you for your time, and I hope you guys were able to enjoy this story today. And if you could do me a big favor and leave a like and subscribe if you already haven't. Until then, later.